much.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. It's a quick fix.
All right, we fixed it.
Yeah.
All right, over to Shahe.
I'm gonna great.
Dim the lights on the way up.
Okay, cool. Thank you. This is recording. Right. Can you hear me? No. There you go. Okay. All right. That's it. Good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in. I know it's early in the morning, and it's also quite a bit of a hike going all the way up. So, my first time lecturing here, so it's a bit different. So, all right. Just before we get started, how many of you guys have actually used Rhino before? You raise your hand. It's quite a bit of it. So it's about half. SketchUp. Ooh, most of you. Okay. And AutoCAD. All of you. Okay, good. Right. So, can you see the screen? Let's see if we can shut this light. Oh, I should have asked which one. Let me see. Hopefully, we'll get started before 10:30. Did anyone notice which button Toby pressed when he left? No? Good. Everyone's paying attention to the screen. That's a good sign. So, press this. That's not it. It's okay. It's fine enough. All right. Let's just get a compromise. Right. So now the reason I asked whether you have experience in this software is because Rhino is, to some extent, very similar to both AutoCAD and SketchUp. And by the way, any of you guys have used Revit before? Oh, actually, quite a bit of you. Okay, right. So now the difference, obviously, between a BIM software like Revit and Rhino is that everything in Rhino is done mechanically. You have to, or sorry, manually. You have to just sculpt an object, versus in Revit, you would have components. So if you want to model a window in Rhino, you have to actually draw curves, create a window, and then plug it in where you want it. Versus BIM, such as Revit, all you have to do is to create a component and plug it in. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages to this. Now, we'll just go through some of the basics here. Before I get started with Rhino, did you guys get the schedule PDF by any chance? Or has that been shared with you? Okay, good. So we'll just quickly run through what we're actually going to be doing. So today what I'll do, I'll run through the introductions. So it's just going to be an overview of the software. I will go through and model a couple of things and set up the initial task, which will be expected from you to submit every week. Now, this what I'll also do today, I just want to kind of give you an idea of where you will be in 2 or 3 weeks in time. So basically, you can start modeling from day one, but you don't really get to model quickly unless you start using tons of shortcuts and then customizing your interface. And all of these are really, really important aspects. So I'm just gonna show you how that works today, just so you can have an idea of what to expect in a few weeks. Right. So next week we'll get started with just modeling, all the techniques, and I'll show you what the methodology for this is. The following week we'll get into all the advanced modeling techniques, and what I'll show as well is all the 3D printing and model making tools that you can use for Rhino. Are you guys all second year by any chance? Is it? Yeah, second. And do you build any models, like physical models? Yeah. Okay. So this will be really useful because Rhino is particularly powerful when it comes to model making. After that, we'll get into 2D drawings, presentations, and I'll give you an overview of the shortcuts so you can customize your Rhino interface and really work as fast as possible, because that's the key trick to Rhino. It will be a really slow software if you just constantly type the commands or move your mouse away to click on specific tools. But then you could set up these shortcuts where you could quickly access the tools that you constantly use. We'll have a look at that. And then what else? So yeah, and then the line drawing. So now this is an incredibly important part of Rhino, and that's a tool called Make 2D. You don't have to write down any of this. I'm just going to give you an overview. But the idea is that when you have an object, you can actually create a line drawing from that object. So you just make 2D, and it gives you a two-dimensional line drawing, just like you do in AutoCAD. It will be the same exact file type, so it's going to be just line work. After that, midterm submission. Now, it seems a bit intimidating. Again, this workshop is meant to be fun. So if you're not having fun, then you're doing something wrong. So make sure whatever you decide to do for your assignments, and I'll run through that in a moment, it's something that you actually want to explore. It takes a little bit of your creativity to enjoy working around Rhino. So, and that's what your midterm submission is going to be. It's the accumulation of all the work that you've done into one sheet. After that, we'll get started to Grasshopper. How many of you guys have used Grasshopper before? Couple. Oh, that's good. That's fine. You're not expected to actually get into Grasshopper, I think, anytime soon, because Rhino is the primary focus of this workshop. But you will come to realize that the tools that are offered in Grasshopper is just absolutely amazing. So we won't get to that anywhere. Well, not today, but week 5. Then we'll have a look at the plugins that come with Grasshopper. And again, simulations, form finding, lots of things, animations and things like that. And then after that, we'll get into V-Ray. Now, V-Ray is a rendering engine, if you've ever used any of the other packages for it. It also has plugins for Revit, SketchUp, I believe. Yeah, SketchUp, 3ds Max, pretty much all the 3D software. The nice thing about Revit is fairly quick to render, so it's a powerful engine. It is also really easy to learn. So you can just go into the library, select the materials you want to use, drag and drop it onto your layers, and done. It's basically you just have to press render and get it finished. So the other good news about this year is that Brooks has purchased V-Ray licenses, and that's the newest V-Ray, which is the user-friendly one. The previous V-Ray 2.0 is slightly more tricky to use. You need to have a robust knowledge of how lighting works, how all materials react with different setup. So this new V-Ray, which Brooks has purchased, will be the same one that we'll cover here. So you don't have to actually have any of these licenses on your computer. Same goes with Rhino. Rhino 6 is available on the computers, but we'll go through this. But you can actually download a 90-day trial for free and use it just like you can do with any software. One in. Warning. And then we're just going through the software the overview of the workshop, and then so after V-Ray, we'll mix Grasshopper and V-Ray together. We're going to explore some of the additional tools. And we'll finish at the workshop with compositing all the content that you've done with Photoshop, Illustrator, and anything else that you want to explore with. And then after that will be just a final submission. So now, again, final submission will be the accumulation of all the works that you've done every week. Now, the assignments, by the end of every, we'll say before Tuesday, every Tuesday, you're going to have to submit an A4 sheet that you can create in Rhino. I'll show that to you today, of the work that you've done for that week. Now, I have to talk to Toby, but I think there's a Moodle set up for you, which you can just directly upload your documents there. It'll be fairly straightforward. But really, the idea is that every week, try to get these assignments because it's important and it will impact your grade for the final digital culture mark. Few tips. Practicing is the key to learn. So you can watch as many tutorials as you want, and I can sit here and show you as much as you want, but you won't really understand it until you put your hand down on the mouse and try it yourself. That's really important. So try to model as many things as you can, because that's the only way really you can get to learn the software. Watch random tutorials. If you go on YouTube, just type in Rhino tutorials. There's tons of tutorials that you can actually watch, and I can promise you, every single tutorial will have something new to offer you. So I've been using Rhino for about I don't know, 7 years. Every time I watch a tutorial, there's still something new that I didn't know and I discover. And all of these little snippets of knowledge will add up to your will add up to optimize your workflow, which means you can work faster, you can model faster, which means you can produce more design iterations. And this is something you'll have to do in the next few years. You have to test your ideas with different versions. Which is why we're going to emphasize on that. If you come to a problem, and this is fairly typical, when you want to model something, you don't know how to do it, you just look it up online. I promise you, someone has already asked that question. If you can't find the answer, chances are your friends know it. So always talk to each other. That's the best way to learn, really. It's the quickest way. And always look for new ways to do things. I've learned a lot by looking over by the shoulder of my friends, just to see what they're actually doing. Because you can model a box 10 different ways. But when you want to model something more specific, there's probably 3 different ways. So if you know all these 10 different ways to model a box, chances are you'll probably have covered the 3 ways that you can model something more advanced. If this sounds a little theoretical, we'll get into. I'll demonstrate what that actually means in Rhino. And the last bit, don't get discouraged if you struggle and you can't model something. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It really is. It is really frustrating that you look at something and you're like, oh, I want to 3D model this, but I can't. That's absolutely fine, because it's the struggle that means you have to put in extra initiative to find solutions. And that's where you get to ask people, you have to look on forums. And this is a constant practice. You're going to have a web page open next to you, always looking for answers, especially when we get into Grasshopper. I still can't fully script something without getting onto forums and searching for different answers, because there are always better ways that people there are better solutions that people have demonstrated that you can find and adapt for your workflow. And I think that's pretty much it for this. Any questions about what we're going to be doing? Right? And don't be shy. If you have any questions at any moment, stop me, because I tend to go through this fast, especially because it's recorded. And so just to show you guys the methodology of how we go about these lectures. So the past couple of years, what we've been doing, we asked students to select 3 objects. Now this year will be just 2. So when you select an object, and these objects can be anything. It could be this, it could be a water bottle, it could be anything that you choose. But the idea is that you choose something that's fairly sophisticated to model, because you don't just choose a box, because you're not going to get really far with that. Now the idea is that you take photographs of these objects from top, side, rear, and all the views, and then you bring them into Rhino, and you set up all these images as work planes. For those of you familiar with Revit, so these are some of the terminology. There will be an overlap between those. So the idea is that you set up these work planes and trace over them, and then model these objects directly from those images. And the idea is that once you model them, then you get to choose how you want to further manipulate those objects. So this was, for example, this is an example of that, where at the top you can see this was the initial object, the plug, the iPhone case, and a pencil sharpener. And the next step was to explore some of the tools that you can further manipulate those objects and create this abstract composition, and at the end, create a rendered image, which does not necessarily resemble anything. This is really just a test. No, not test. That's not the right word. But it's just to make it fun. And trust me, if you invest the time and enjoy this, you're going to really have a good sort of final result, which you can actually put into your portfolio and present. It is an abstract, what's the word I'm looking for? An exercise. So you don't have to be accurate about everything you do. It's all about understanding how the software works with a twist of with a little bit of fun. That's the best way to put it. Some of the work that students have submitted, we're going to change all these layouts and everything that you see. It's not going to be necessarily look like this, but that's the idea. Uh, so these were the objects the students selected, and then the objects were manipulated, and then these are all the steps to which this person got to that final result and some final images. And you can see there's an array of objects that people have selected. And the rendering should be much better this year because I think these were, well, this one in particular was actually pretty good because I think this person used V-Ray. But the idea is that when you get to use V-Ray, you'll see that there's just so much more than simply doing photorealistic renderings. You could actually take that to the next step for your composition. And that's pretty much it. So this is really going to be the methodology that we're going to be using. You're free to select any object you like, and I'll show you what I have selected for mine. Now, speaking of objects, and this will be your next week's assignment, basically, you're being asked to select 2 objects. So it's not going to be 3, it's going to be less. So 2 objects. Photograph one of them, like I have. So my first object is a fan. So I have a photo of the rear, front, side, and top. So these are all the elevation views that I need and plan view in order to trace and model these objects. I need this information to model it. My second object, so this is again your second object, is something slightly less complicated. So you can see this fan has a lot of details, has a lot of curvatures, and that's what your object needs to have. The one that you're selecting for photographing needs to have this level of complexity. The other model should be slightly more simpler. So this one has slightly more has a more Euclidean shapes. So I could just use cylinders, the straightforward objects to actually model it. But the point is, this one won't be photographed. You have to look at the object, observe it, and then take notes with all the measurements. So in a way, you're surveying that objects, and it's up to you how you want to do it. You don't have to actually keep it accurate. This is just a sketch. So I just quickly drew the top view, so plan view, front view, and then the side view. And the side view, because I wanted to see the details of how it would look like inside, it's best to actually show it in sections so you can have an understanding what the inside in a way looks like. And then add as much dimensions and details you would need in order to replicate this model. So just to summarize, for next week, this will be your assignment. You won't really get into Rhino, but just a little bit in order to set this up. You have your name top left corner, assignment number 1. So these 2, just please follow those 2 steps. The rest is up to you how you lay it out. Object 2 and 1 should be the other way around, but it doesn't matter. So one object just photographs, top, side, front view. And the other object, just a 3-dimensional photo, so perspective view with sketched information of how you actually, so it's basically all the measurements. So when somebody picks up this drawing, they can actually 3D model it based on only the information you have provided without having to input any references into the software. I think that's good enough to cover this. Is any questions about this? Everyone clear about the assignment? Is that okay? Not too much, is it? Okay, good. All right, so let's get started with Rhino. Now, before I get into Rhino, I'm just going to real quick Rhino 3D. If you haven't if it's recommended if you have a laptop, you can bring it in, follow along, but you don't have to follow along all the steps because you're gonna fall behind, and it's better to actually pay attention. However, every now and then I talk about specific commands, and the only way to actually understand the command is to do it. So if you can follow along for those, it would be really beneficial. Now, for those of you who are planning on getting downloading Rhino, you just go out to the website, click on download, and there it is. If you're on Windows, you can click on complete install Rhino 6 for Windows. So 90 days free. After 90 days, what happens? You still have the software, but it won't let you save. So you can open it up, practice as much as you want, but you can't save it. So you have the software for 3 months, which means you can actually go through this workshop without having to buy it. Now, the other version for Rhino is there's also a Mac version of this. It's just as good as Windows. I prefer the Windows version, and that's because before they used to only have Grasshopper on Windows, but now they've integrated that with Mac. But again, the interface is slightly different, as you can see when you go onto the homepage. Um, Actually, it looks a little better than the traditional, Windows interface. But having said that, you can customize everything in Rhino's interface, meaning all these colors. You could, if you decide to put red or orange in the background, it's all up to you. You can customize that. We'll get into that in a later session. And yeah, so yeah, that's the Grasshopper. Just so you can see, line drawings. This is the kind of things that you expected to be working with, and things like this is it's typical for Rhino. It's just so easy to do stuff like this, and it's not really. We're not suggesting that use Rhino when you're dealing with curvatures. It's pretty much use Rhino when you're doing anything from an object this size to an actual building. It has the capability to handle all of those. Right. So let's just have a quick view at the interface. So when you open up Rhino, oh, and by the way, I forgot to cover this. When you download this, it's going to ask you to register. The new licensing system for Rhino 6 is through login information. So you have to register your email address and then log in with your email address, and that's the only way you can actually link your license to the software to run it, which means you have to have access to internet when you're doing this. Right, so that's that. So as you can see, this one is currently expired, but I'm not going to worry about that because we're not going to be saving any work. But when you open up Rhino, this will be your interface. Now, this I can see it's slightly different, so I'm just going to change it to how it should look by default. Right, so by default, you're going to have 4 different windows. Now, how do you actually navigate in Rhino? So everything is with right click. So if you're in perspective and if you press down right click, you can just rotate your mouse around and it will rotate the scene. And now if you want to pan it across, you just have to hold down shift and then right click again. Now it's exactly like AutoCAD, but instead of the middle mouse button where you have to press the middle mouse, you just have to press down right click. So again, right click to rotate, hold down shift to pan around. Now you can see I have different views next to that. So you have top view, and as soon as I press on that, this one turns blue, which means that's the primary viewport, which I can draw anything or model anything. And that changes as you press on these. So when I go over here, because this is an orthogonal view, which is flat, it's not perspective. When I press down right click, it's only going to move in 2 dimensions. It's not going to do a 3D rotation. So that's because it's a flat plane. Now for zooming in and out, that's your scroll is again same as AutoCAD, Revit, and all the other ones. You can also press down Control, then again right click, and then move your mouse up and down in order to zoom in and out. So it's like a smoother version of zoom. And if you want to zoom in an object, to like a really close point, you just press down Control and just zoom in and drag your mouse up until it gets really close. It might get a little annoying after a while when you're scrolling back and forth. Now, that's that. If you want to, say, primarily model things in 3D, you don't want to deal with the top, front, or right views, you can maximize the perspective view by double clicking on the banner. And that's true for all the other views. So if you double click, it's going to just make that the primary view. So how do you actually go about modeling? Now, in Rhino, there are several ways that you can model. And this is, again, similar to AutoCAD in a way that you can locate the icon of what you're looking for. So these are all the tools. Each execute a specific command. Now, for example, that one, I'm just going to hover over that. It says, with your left click, you get polyline. Your right click is a line segment, and that's with that little icon. Now, that's one way to select, and then I can start just drawing my lines. And then when I'm finished, I just press enter, and that's done. So now that command has been executed. I have the line work, and that's good to go. Now I can also model this by typing in polyline. So you can see as soon as I start typing in POLY, it will give me all the options that have these letters in it. The first one is what I'm looking for. So I can just click on that, press enter, and that's the same exact command as going over here and pressing on it. So that's that. Now there's also a third way. All these options at the top are basically where all these tools are. So you're dealing with curves, and curves means lines. So this is where all the line commands are. So if you click on curve, and you can come down to polyline, and that will do the same exact thing. So you can see different ways of doing the same thing. It depends on the person. I tend to use shortcuts. I tend to use just the command line, which is here, and that's where you type in all the commands. Just find it quicker, maybe because I got used to that. Some other people tend to use just the icons, so they just look for the icons and quickly locate those. It's all the same. It's really up to you how to. It's up to you how you want to go about this. Now, also, say that you can actually customize this. So you can see as I'm dragging things around, I can reconfigure the interface. And if I'm not happy with this setup, I'd rather have the tools to my right side. I can actually go over to these two lines and hover over to the right side of the panel and just duck it into that side. But I've gotten used to this with the same interface that it comes with. So these are some of your I think it's called the side toolbar or side toolbar. And then at the top here, this is your main toolbar. So, and above that, all these tabs are toolbar groups, which are specific to those commands. So you can see if you want to deal with selection, all the tools related to selection will be here. Now, you can also notice that as I go across, when I press on these, my side toolbar also changes. And I know at first it feels a bit intimidating because there's just so many tools. How are you even supposed to know all these? Now, the good news is that you don't actually need to know all of these tools in order to work in Rhino. Most of the time what you need is already placed in this side toolbar. So all of that is here. And if you don't find it, just type it in. Chances are it will be there. So if you're looking for the move command, you can't find it. You don't actually know how a move can be graphically represented. You can just type in MOVE, or you can just type M, press enter, and that will be the move command. So, and what I also want to say that you can see that the side toolbar changes. These are, half of them are the same icons that you see in your standard toolbar. So recognize these two. If I go over to my curve tool, same two icons appear. That's just because if you're only dealing with curves, if you're just doing line work, all the line work tools are available to you. just in front of you, basically. Again, so let's just go back to standard, and we're just gonna use this for now. Now, some of these tools. So, for example, if I click on this, that's my polyline. Press enter. That's done. Some of these tools have this little triangle to the bottom right corner, and that means it has additional tools if you click on it. Now you can select that one, which is a single segment, and there are all these other ones, which, to be honest, I have not used any of them. I've only used these two. Same with all the other types of commands. So you've got all these line works, and then you have surface tools. Now, if I want to use these surfaces, and I'll explain in a moment what that is, I can just drag this out. Now I always have this, and it's easily accessible from the side. So I can click on this one, rectangle, 2 points. There you go. That just draws a surface. I can choose this one, vertical plane, and it will be a vertical plane. This is all just surfaces. Now you might ask, how come my display looks different than yours? That's because my viewport is set to wireframe display, and that means if you go over to perspective, right click on it, you'll see I have all these different viewport options. So if you click on shaded, all of a sudden everything changes, and now you can't see through these objects. Same thing if I go over to rendered. Now that shows me with the rendered view, and I know it's not what you expect, but this was a good improvement actually on Rhino's end. Rhino 6 has this new rendering interface, rendering technique, which shows you the ambient occlusion of your geometry. So it gives you a soft shadow. It's easy to quickly understand what it is that you're looking at. It's like a clay model. So that's one way. Ghosted allows you to see through the objects, and X-ray, again, all these other, I'll let you explore these, but so for example, technical, if something is behind it, it will show you with dashed line. Explore these different viewports. It will come to a point that you have to represent the objects you've modeled, and it's best to actually know what's available to you and use them creatively. So that's that. Pen, well, we're not going to get into that. Let's just go back to shaded. And just so you know, you can also access these options by pressing down Control Shift W. Was that wrong? Control, maybe it's Command Shift in Mac. Command Shift W. No, Control. Ah, I can never get this right. Command Shift. No, it's not working. What is that? All right, well, that doesn't work, but I'm pretty sure it was Control Shift W, or one or the other. It's like three keys. I'll show you where you can find the answer to these questions. But it's a quick way of going back from wireframe. Say you're modeling something and you want to see through this real quick. You just switch over to wireframe, and it takes time to go over to this, go wireframe, and say, oh, it's okay. Go back, press shaded. You want to eliminate all these extra steps. Right, so surfaces, solids, you have all these solids. There are even these subgroups within the groups, so different ways of creating boxes. And one thing is true in Rhino, every time you execute a command, you're going to see your prompt line is going to ask you, is going to ask you to do the next step. So it's always going to ask you to do something in order to return and finalize the command. So I'm going to press escape and run this again. So I want to draw a box. Click on the box. You can see the next thing that asks me is put the first corner of base. Now that means anywhere I do a single click, that will be the first option. So the next option is other corner of base or length. So that means I can intuitively put this point somewhere else, or alternatively, I can actually type in the number. So if I know the length or the dimensions, the measurements of my box, I can say, okay, so I'm going to look down here. That gives me an indication of how far I'm moving this option. So we're dealing with hundreds. So I'm going to put 400 by 200. Oops, no, 400. So that's, say, what is that? It doesn't say. It's the width, say. And then press enter. Now the next option is the width. Well, it was the length before, so there you go. So 8 500, press enter. Now it's also going to ask you for the height. So it starts with length, width, and height. So we're going to put 500, type enter. This box is now accurate to those measurements. So if I type in distance and measure this, so from that corner to this corner, it will tell me that's 800 millimeter. How do you repeat a command that you've just executed? Obviously, you can just type it in again, so distance, press enter. But a quicker way is if you press your space bar or the enter or the right click, so there are three different ways, it will repeat the previous command. So again, if I hit escape and press my space bar, that's going to go up to this prompt line which says first point for distance. And that's where you get to put your points and see the measurement. So that's that. Now, it's important that you're working in the right units. The chances are, by default, you're going to get millimeters. If that is not the case, you can change your units by typing in units, press enter, and that's going to take you directly to the window where all these information is available to you. So this is basically that little gear, which means options. And what I did, I skipped that step by typing in units, and it directly took me to this units command. So there you go, your model units, you can change that to millimeters and press OK. Now, this is how you deal with tools. One other thing that I want to show you. So let's say you want to move this box. Select the box, type in move. And then now I can grab it from a corner and say move it and snap it over to that corner. If your snap doesn't work, that's because the tool hasn't been enabled. So if you come down to here, this is called the status bar. The status bar will show you what options are enabled. And for now, you have something called gumball. And what gumball is this three-dimensional, it's this widget that always follows around the objects. We'll get into that a bit later. And then you have OSnap, and that's object snap. So if I turn this off, you can see these options just grayed out, which means if I type move and try to grab it from the corner, it doesn't let me snap onto the corner. So you can see it looked like I grabbed onto the corner, but I haven't. Now that's because my object snap is off. So if I turn it back on and check these options on, so again, end, near, point, mid, int, perp, quad, and even let's just keep that one. So I think these ones, I always keep these ones on. Every now and then I turn on center, and that's because it tends to gravitate too much towards center, no matter how much you try to aim for the corner. So it's always best to turn that one off and only keep it on when you actually need it. So that's your object snap. Now again, I'm going to undo this. So we move that box from here to here. Now, what if I want to actually move it vertically up above and put it on top of this, but not directly on top of it? So say that's a lift, and you just want to move it up and line it up against that. So you can, as you can see, I just dragged it using this gumball, and what that does, blue means your z-axis, red is X, and Y is your green. So if you drag it with these arrows, you can drag it into in those directions. And if you notice, as I turn my camera, this little plane shows up. What that means it's a combination of X and Y. So if I drag it from here, now I can move it in any of those directions within that plane. So if I could go to the site view, now that changes to Y and Z. So you can see it's green and blue, which means I can now move this in that axis. Now it's difficult to see, but if I double click on this so I can see the object from all views. So we're looking at it from top, front, and right view. So you can see I'm now moving it in this plane, which is red and blue. And you can see in the front view, which is facing this, that's the only view that it's moving in. So, sorry, the only plane that it's moving. On my bottom window, which is the right view. So looking at it from that side, it's always going to be on that plane. So this is it comes in really handy every now and then. Now going back to what we initially wanted to do, which was to move this object up. Now I showed you that's one way, but that's not very accurate. How do you actually move it and line it up exactly with the other box? So make sure your object snap is on. Select the object, type move, and grab it from the corner. So that's my first point. Now, before I press on that, you can see next to my point to move from, in brackets, it says vertical equals no. That means the command move gives me the option to enable vertical and only lock the movement to vertical axis. So if I press on this and now press on that move command, regardless of where my mouse moves, it's only going to move up and down. So you're locking the axis only basically just onto that Z axis. Now I can just move it up. I have the option of typing in the height. So if I type in 500, that was the height of this. That will bring it up 500. Or let's just delete that. I can just snap it onto that, and that will raise it up exactly on top of the box. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Any questions? If I'm going too quickly, please stop me. I have a tendency to just fly through some of the options without realizing I haven't explained specific stuff. So, right, let's now. So that's just an overview of how you go about executing commands. Again, if you're in doubt, if you're looking for something, you don't know where to look for it, just type it in. Chances are it's already there. Now, a couple other options. Ortho is orthogonal, so that's all of you guys are familiar with it. It's same as AutoCAD. If you start drawing, it's only going to go in orthogonal directions. If I press down Shift, it's going to disable that. You can see as I press down Shift, it turns it off. Now I can just move into any other direction. And as soon as I let it go, it's back on orthogonal. I usually keep it off, but I know some people like to use that at all times. Now, that's just an overview of how you run commands and everything. If you want to switch over views, instead of going back to double-clicking your perspective, going back to top, you can actually go down here and press top, front, right. It will just go through these views. It's the same as double-clicking and double-clicking on the other one next to it. A shortcut to run through all the views is Control Tab. Let's see if this one works. There you go. Yeah. So Control Tab will move in a forward direction, go through all the views. And if you want to go back, you just have to hold down Shift Control Tab. So it's by adding Shift is where you move backwards. So again, little shortcuts that I'm just going to tell you guys because it comes in handy when you're speed modeling in Rhino. Right. So that's all of it in here. Now, onto your right side, you will see the panels. Now, the panels are accessed from here, so that's the window. This is where everything is. But it's easier to actually go down over to these tabs. And if you have something that is shown here, but you don't have it on your laptops, if you right-click, you can actually select which panels you want to display there. So currently I have layers, display, named views, properties. We won't get into these, but let's just turn off named views because we don't need that. Turn off sun. We don't need that either. So we have properties, layers, display. Now what this is like additional information about the models that you have in your Rhino. Every time you select an object, the properties will display specific information about that object. So right now, that's a box, and I select it, and it will give me a bunch of different tools. Now, if I had a polyline next to that, and now, again, this is, we won't get into the terminology, but let's just say this is a box now. Next to that, it's a line. When I select the line, you can see the options are different than from the box. So if I click on the line, I can see what it says. So if first it gives me the object properties, which is the type. Now it's a curve, which is a line, versus a closed extrusion. Again, extrusion is a lighter version of polysurfaces. Now, what are polysurfaces? Polysurfaces are multiple surfaces. So if I select this, that's a surface. If I copy that next to it and then join, combination of two surfaces turns it into a polysurface. So just some of those terminology, it actually doesn't really matter for you to know at this point what this mean. But basically, an extrusion is a lighter version of a polysurface, which means if you have tons of extrusions, it's going to process faster than having tons of polysurfaces. Again, you don't have to memorize any of these because it doesn't actually matter at this point. Now, going back to the properties. Curve, now you have the name, I barely use that. It also shows you what layer this is in. Now this is really, really important. Using layers in Rhino is critical because you have to organize all the objects in your scene in order to navigate smoothly through the modeling process. So if I go over to Model tab, sorry, Layers tab, you can see I have one layer that's called Default. If I want to create new layers, just press on New, and I can just keep on going. And I can do a single click and give this layer a name. So let's call it Box. And over to the right side, you can see there's this option that says Current, which means it's the layer that's selected. Again, very, very similar to AutoCAD. You just double click on that. Now this will become the primary layer, which means anything you draw, it will come onto this box, so layer. So that object that I just drew, if I click on it, go back to my properties, you can see by default it went under the box layer because that's set to my current. Now, you also have the option to turn your visibility, lock the layers, and change the color. So if I want to change the color, I can change it to red, and that will impact the object. Now you notice black actually is represented as light gray. And that's just because by default, most of the time you want a layer to be black because probably line work is there. You want that to be black and all that. But it's not very convenient if the object was pitch black. But if it's slightly, uh, if it's not, you can see the RGB values 10, 10, 10. It's not going to come out dark black. It's not the actual black, but it will give you a fairly black object. It's not critical. This is just in case you're wondering why is it that when you put black, it doesn't come out black. It's just one of those things. Right, so this is it. All the other options, we won't get into that. And if you're curious about it, you could just either turn it off from here. Let's see, just take them out. We only will be dealing with these for now. Okay. A couple of quick things before we take a quick break. So box, so that's my layer. Now I'm gonna do another one and call line. Oops. Just do a single click on this and type line. Now, this object, if I select it, that's a line, but if I go into the properties, it says it's in default layer. How do you change layers? You can select the object, come over to the layer, right click, change object layer. Now that's placed in the layer line. You don't have to necessarily select the object, go over to the properties to see what layer it's on. If you look down here, this gives you extra information about the objects you've selected. So right now it's on line layer. So if I switch over to box, I think this is, yeah, there you go, box layer, changes to line. So it's just another way of quickly identifying what there is on that line. Now, you can also do sub-layers. What that means is if I say, I want to actually separate my lines from my solid objects, I can just type in here, let's say solids, and I can drag my box onto that layer, and that's going to put it underneath. This is something that's really useful because instead of having millions of layers, you can actually group these layers using sub-layers. So now that this is underneath the solid layer, I can actually what is it? Collapse or yeah, collapse the sublayer, or I can just expand it by clicking on this. You can add as many sublayers as you like. If you want to add blank ones, you click on the parent layer and click on this one, which says new sublayer. But be careful because if you're still on it, if you click on sublayer on that, it will create a sublayer of that sublayer. And if you've done that by accident, if you want to take it out, it's this little tool. So just move up, and that will bring it back out from the parent layer. Now let's just delete that one. Go over to this, delete that. And we're going to call another layer called lines and drag this into that. So you can see I have two sublayers and I can just get rid of, hold down shift, select multiple. So if you have an object in a layer and you decide to delete that layer, it's going to give you a warning that says it has one object. Are you sure you want to delete it? And if you say yes, then it will delete that object. Yes to all, we'll just get rid of whatever was on that layer and just delete that one. Right. Okay. That's pretty much, I think, let's just take a quick break. Say 5 minutes. Is that okay? Do you guys want it longer or is that okay? 5 is good enough. Yeah? Okay, good. Let's come back at 10:07, please. 7 past 10. And we'll continue on from there. Right. Are we ready? Should we continue? Prefer the break? Right. Let's carry on with modeling. Any questions before I continue on the next steps? Questions? Everyone good? Okay. Uh, right. So now something about the panels. You can go ahead and explore these on your own, but some of the useful ones, again, layers and properties, really useful. Display is another one I always keep onto my right. And the reason for that is sometimes you're drawing something, you want to quickly change the background color and some additional information. All that is accessible from the display tab. So if you go onto the display, click on color, by default, I think it's gray or lighter gray. You can change that to anything you like. Not that that's ideal, but just that's an option. I think I keep it on white, or sometimes if you're used to AutoCAD, you can actually turn that black. But remember, your line work won't appear. Or you can actually keep it dark gray. And that's probably not bad. Other information in your display properties. So same thing is accessible from here. So the view display mode on your viewport, wireframe. Again, same thing as going over here. Shaded. You can see there are multiple ways of doing the same thing in Rhino. So in this case, you got the display mode, the background color, and then there are all these information. So for example, if I don't want to see the edges of this object, I can just turn it off by clicking on surface edges, and that's going to get rid of that. That's just one of those items. The other thing is also, let's see, it doesn't exist. So if there are options that you're looking for and it's not here, you can see down here it says edit shaded settings. And that's gonna, just like units, it's gonna take you straight to the window where all these information is in. So you can have, click on the shaded, but that gives you additional information about that view. So you have all these other settings, etc. We're not gonna get into any of this. There's tons of options that you can change in Rhino, but it's not really necessary to go through all of them. So that's that. Actually, I'm standing up. What else is there? So if you right click on this, you can look through this. So there's a calculator. If you're punching in a bunch of numbers, you can actually do it directly here. Turn that off. Use it. Then environment. So Grasshopper, we'll get to that later. This is a useful one. Help. It helps you. So if you select an object, I thought auto update. Oh, maybe, okay. So if you click on a command and you're not sure how to use it, as soon as you click on it, when the auto update is on, that's going to take you directly to how actually you can use that command. So in this case, I selected the polyline, and that gives me polyline, all the tools that are related to that. So it says where you can find it on the toolbar. Again, toolbar is this thing. Or you can actually find it under menu, under curves. Next thing, polyline. So you remember curves, polyline, you just follow along and you can see that. It gives you a brief description of what that tool does. So polyline command draws a series of joint, line, or arc segments. Some notes, you can read on that. And there's this little video animation that actually show you how you could do things. This is really useful because you don't have to look on YouTube to find how do you actually use a command. It just directly gives you. And for those of you who just walked in, we're discussing some of the additional panels here. If you enable help, it will give you additional information about Rhino. So if you're not sure about how to use this command, which is a surface using 4 corners, as soon as you click on it, all the information about that comes up. So you can just click on this, and look through all the information here. Oh, there's a voice thing too. Oh, we're not gonna do that now. So that's help. You can also refresh that by toggling between two panels. So if I do that, it's going to jump back to the initial page. So it says, welcome to Rhino, some additional information. Tour the Rhino window, all these things that you can actually click on. So there's video training, Rhino tutorials on Vimeo, very helpful actually. These ones on Vimeo, you can look through here. Getting started modeling with Rhino, 52 minutes. Don't use. So we're gonna watch this now. I'm just kidding. But this is really the idea. Everything is just next to you. There's even YouTube tutorials. To be honest, I've never used this, but it's worth giving it a try. So if you type in Rhino introductory tutorials, if you come to learning to use Rhino tutorial collection, these are some really good tutorials for just getting started. If you want to get ahead, learning some of the additional tools, so this is where you can find some of that. How many of you guys are using Mac on Rhino or Rhino for Mac? So it's about a third. Okay. The interface, are you actually using the Mac version of Rhino or are you running Windows? Is it Mac? Rhino Mac? Okay. The interface is slightly different. So you might want to check out some of these tutorials for the interface, for example, the interface basics. Again, Vimeo tutorials, real quick, it just runs through all the options. It's worth having a look because some of the things that I'm talking about here in Windows it's not going to be the same on Mac. So that's help. We'll just turn that off for now. There's stats, light, macro. So again, all these additional things. Notes, that's a really useful one. What I'll do from now on, I'll just type in all the commands I'm using in case you want to take notes. So you can type in, so for example, so far we've covered move, copy. What else was it? Blanked. I think we've only used, polyline, there you go, polyline. Right, so, and I'm also going to just drag this out. Any of these panels, you can drag it out and put it. So if you have a second screen, you prefer to push this over to your second screen, that's how you can do it. Or you can grab it from the top, duck it down here. You can see the highlight indicates the place it's gonna, the edge is gonna line it up to. So the bottom edge, we're gonna keep it here and I'm gonna just reduce that. Oh, what happened to the text? Move, copy, polyline. Right. Now, one thing I've completely forgotten to cover, really important, is to save. Save your files as much as you can. Go over to File, and yours should be active. The reason I can't save is because this Rhino trial has expired, but if you have the 90-day trial, it should give you the option. So when you click on Save As, it's going to save it as, and you know the way, this is really fairly straightforward. Save as, and you're going to have the option of giving it a name and saving it as different Rhino versions. Now, this is important because you'll see you have the option to save it as Rhino 6 by default, or you can downgrade it to Rhino 5. If you're going to be working with other students, and say your partner has Rhino 5 and you're using Rhino 6, you want to make sure every time you save it as Rhino 5. Otherwise, your friend will not be able to open that file. Something to keep in mind. But yes, save as much as you can. And when you start using the file, get used to the shortcut Control S. That's the same as saving it. So I'll just put down here, CTRL plus S. Control save just saves it. Another thing that's important, and I won't be able to demonstrate this, but it's worth mentioning. When you're modeling something, every now and then, save as a new number. So if the name of this file that I'm using right now is called box, the first file I save will be called box_1. Half an hour later, when I've modeled a little bit more, I want to save it as box number 2. Now I have the option to save directly onto that box forever. But the problem is, if you do that, at some point you might do something in your file, whether it's importing a SketchUp file, DWG, or somehow you manage to corrupt the file. That file will not be repairable. So you won't be able to go back, which is good to always have these stepping. So by the end of the week, you're expected to have bucks underscore one, bucks underscore two, and so on until like bucks underscore seven. And the nice thing is when you save a Rhino file, and again, sadly, I won't be able to show you that here, but is there a Rhino file here? Uh, uh, anyway, you'll see when you save it and you go over to your folders, and let's say a Rhino file is sitting here. If you just do a single click on it, how do you open that window? Actually, it's not showing. Anyone know how to open that display window to the side? Anyone? Used to be a window that shows you a preview of that view. Ah, right. And is that one? Is that it? Ah, that's it. Great. Thank you very much. So when you have a Rhino file sitting here, when you click on it, you will see a snapshot of what's inside your Rhino file. So it will probably show you a perspective view of this, whatever view you saved it as last when you left it. And on top of that, all these notes that I'm writing here will also show down here. So it will be a perspective view. It will be pixelated. It won't be high res. Pixelated view of that, and underneath you will have all the notes. And that's really useful because you can imagine you're issuing a file to a friend or say a 3D printing company, and you're saying this is meant to be 3D printed at this scale, and you can put all those notes down here, and people don't have to necessarily open the file to view them. You can just do a single click, you'll see all the notes down there. Just a little additional thing to know. Right, so panels, let's see if we can get through this. Notifications, don't worry about that. Rendering, we're not going to get into any of that. Tutorials. Now, I only recently discovered this. I had no idea they had this here. But the idea is that you have level 1 training manual, double click on it, it's going to download, and it's going to open it here. So you can see. Now, if you have all the time in the world, you can sit down and read all that, but it's probably easier not to. So just so you know, there are resources. There are tons of resources for this, and there are also additional Rhino files that you can actually open up and have a play with. These follow with tutorials that are in that PDF. So one rail sweep is you have to look at the sweep chapter to see what that actually does. If you come down here, sample models, you can actually open up some of these sample models if you just want to have a play. Yeah, we can say no, I don't have a choice. Open that new file. It will give you sample files so you can actually open up and see how it's done and have a play with. And then what else is there? So, and then user guides. We're not. I think this is just takes you to the website. Anyway, so that's tutorials, and I think there's also a web browser. You can actually search things directly from here. And it doesn't take you directly to Google, so if you have to actually look up stuff, you have to type in the URL correctly in order to get to the website. So if you want to see what's going on in the news while you're modeling, you can actually open it here. You can also play YouTube, so it does everything, but it's just an extra thing, not really useful. Okay, one thing I want to mention about the properties. Remember, when you select an object, it will give you all the details and information about that object. So right now, it's that blue thing. It gives me the object, materials, whatever material has been selected to it, texture maps, blah, blah, blah. Now, if I don't have anything selected, by default, it's going to give me the properties of my viewport. So you can see, I haven't selected anything. It has this little camera, and it gives me the title of the view, which I can change. So if I go over here, right click on that and call this view one. I can change the name of that view. That changes here. It will come in handy when you're setting up your sheets, and we'll get through that. The other thing is the projection. So currently it's set to perspective with a lens length of 50 millimeters. So that means I can change that, say to 35 if I want something of a fisheye. So there you go. So you've got these different uh, lenses that you can actually play with if you're looking for a specific view. Or it's best to leave that actually on 50. Or if you want to have a look at different types of projections, you can use parallel, which will give you this kind of view, or isometric looking views. But there's also 2-point perspective, but I don't know if anyone uses that. So we'll just go back to perspective. Somehow my camera got out of focus. So this is also a typical thing that happens. Your camera just gets out of focus. Well, how do you bring back the focus onto the object? You select the object and you type in ZS, enter. It zooms on the selected object. So just put that. Oh, I just keep losing this. Forgot there was a new model. Maybe we should do a notepad. Move, copy, so we go beyond these 3 words. Okay, polyline. And so that was ZS, CTRL plus S for saving, and CTRL plus tab is to go through views, so we won't lose. So keep that notepad on. Right. So that's just an overview of how you work around in Rhino. Now, before I get into the assignment for next week, I'm just going to quickly demonstrate a typical workflow, especially for those of you who are familiar with SketchUp, because oftentimes people think, oh, in Rhino you have to first draw lines and then extrude and then trim and all that stuff. There's a way to do it similar to how you do it in SketchUp. So a new file, template, you could choose between large object millimeters or small objects. The difference really is between the tolerance, but it doesn't actually matter for this exercise. We're just gonna go with, let's go with large objects. Right, so window opens. Now, let's say we want to model something like, let's look up a toy house, something that doesn't have too much detail, but we can just quickly pick up and model. So something like this. Let's say you have this object and you want to just model it in Rhino without having any references. This is like SketchUp techniques. So I'm gonna just save this image as a reference. So I'm gonna bring it to the desktop. Introduction Rhino. We'll just name it 1. Press enter. How do you import images to Rhino? It's as simple as drag and drop. So if you go back to wherever you saved it, drag it in. It's going to ask you how you want to import this. For now, we're just going to stick to picture. So picture means, again, follow the prompt, first corner of picture. That's the first corner, second corner here. Now I have that image inside Rhino. It's good for tracing, although we're not going to be tracing anything. It's just, we'll have it here as a reference. But, oh, what just happened? No, that's it. So essentially, what this is a box with roof on top of it with a bunch of holes in it. So let's try to quickly model this. I don't expect you to follow along because I'll probably just going through this fast. And this is just to show you that there are faster ways of modeling, and that's similar to SketchUp. So we'll start with the box and change the view to shaded so we can see it. Now we also want to introduce a gable. Now I can use a command called split face. So if I type that in, split face, and follow along, it says select the face to split. So essentially I want to split the top edge to introduce an edge, and then I can pull that up. So select that and then press enter when done. Now it's going to say split axis. So this is where you draw a line. So if I hover over there, my object snaps on. So if I hover over it, it will say midpoint. And I want it from midpoint, perpendicular across. When I'm done, press enter. Now, all we've done is just introduce a edge right in the middle of that box. How do you actually select that edge? So this is the shortcut in Rhino. If you press down Control and Shift, let's put that down, CTRL plus Shift, and then press on the edge, it's going to only select that edge, which means now I can move that up. So now I have that shape. Again, it's Control Shift and press the edge. You could do the same thing with faces. So say you're not happy with the length of this, you want to make this slightly longer. Control Shift, select the face, and just pull that up. So that's the first step. Now we can do multiple things to create that gable roof. What I can do is we can extract the surface. Now, if you notice, when I selected it, it selects all the faces. But all I want is just the top two surfaces that I can just scale and then trim, and now you'll see. So if I go over to the explode command, the second option is extract surface. It's asking me to extract the surface select surfaces to extract. So that's one, that's two, and then press enter when done. And that's it. So now these two surfaces have been detached from that initial box that we had. If you want to go back and save it, or sorry, group them, ooh, that's not good. Right. If you want to go back and put it back with the rest of the geometry, if you select all the objects and type in join, not John, join, and if I come back to select it, you can see it doesn't let me select it, but I'm going to undo that because that was the point. We're going to extract these two surfaces from there. So let's go back, extract SRF. And that's a shortcut, extract SRF. SRF in Rhino means surface, CRV means curves. That's just, that's what the command lines take. So now that we have this, remember this gimbal, you can move it. You can also rotate it. And you can also scale it. So if I grab this, I can just scale it in that direction or in this direction. Now, if you notice what happens is because the gimbal is going to scale it in that direction, it actually deforms the object. So we don't want that. I'm going to undo. Now I want this to scale uniformly. So if I hold down Shift and then press on that, that's just going to scale all of it on that plane because remember, this is a flat surface. When you scale it in 3 dimensions, it's only going to scale in that direction. So we could either do the same, but because I don't know how much I scaled it, I did it intuitively. I'm just going to delete that, select this guy and type mirror to now use that center point and mirror that across. Let's just do that one more time. So the command for that is mirror, select the object, type mirror, and it's going to ask you to start of mirror plane. So that would be that point. Hold down Shift, and now we've mirrored that across. Now I can trim these edges using the trim command. So if you select the object, type trim, this is just like the trim in AutoCAD, where you have a bunch of objects intersecting, and then when you activate the trim command, you can go ahead and delete all the extra bits. So right now, I've only assigned that surface to be the trim object. So all I have to do is to select object to trim, and we just want to take out that tail. So that goes off. Now I can repeat the same command onto this one. So I'll select this one, type trim, and then press that bit. So you just trims off all those extra bits. That was trim. Now we have the roof. Could select these two and join them. So it's now a joined surface. You can also just scale it down a little bit, just so it it's matching it. So now we want to give this a thickness. Well, a couple of ways to do this, but the quickest way is if you type offset srf, which means offset the surface. So if I press that, it's going to give me an indication the default direction is going to offset in, which is outwards, which is correct. And if yours is the wrong way, all you have to do is remember the options in brackets. Move command only had one, which was vertical. Offset surface has all these ones. So you can set the distance, you can set the corner type. You want it to be solid, otherwise it will be an empty offset. It's just going to put another surface away from by 300 mil. The input, we don't want to deal with that. So flip all, that's the correct direction. And I actually don't know what the distance is. So because I haven't measured it, I've just sort of eyeballed the whole process. All I have to do is say offset distance. I have the choice of putting in the number, or if I don't know the number, I say, you know what, I just want it to be about that much. That sets that number. So all I have to do is you can see distance already updated to the amount that I've just indicated here. 21 mil. When it's done, just press enter, and that's gonna give me that roof. Now it's a bit strange. So let's just undo and run the command again. So by pressing spacebar, corner says round, so we want that to be sharp. And maybe we want this to be a little bit less. So I'm just gonna choose a thickness about that much. You can do this anywhere. It doesn't have to be of this corner. And let's try this one. Now that's better. So now we have that. So we've got the roof on. The other thing we also want to have is the base. So you can see there's another box underneath. So you can go ahead and say, okay, let's just draw another box and just select this, and then press down enter, sorry, press down shift and then scale it up so it scales it uniformly. Otherwise, it's just going to do it in each direction, which might not be a bad idea. You can, that way it keeps it level with the bottom. So, and by the way, oftentimes you find yourself working in 4 different views. So maybe if a perspective is your primary view, you can expand that one. So you're working in this, but you also want to have an idea of what goes on from above. So if you want to understand the proportions, whether everything is correct or not, you turn on all these and you make sure they're all in focus. So, and as you select, all these objects will highlight in all different views. So if you're unsure what that is, you just select it and that turns on there. Notice that there are these extra crosses on these views. That's called an isocurve. An isocurve is just an indicator. It puts a line across your surfaces. And to be honest, I actually don't know what the use of that is, but there are some useful things that you could do. I'll cover that later. That's called extract wireframe, and that takes out all the isocurves. And but anyway, it's missing here. That's because if I go onto my display, it's probably off. So surface isocurve, yeah. So now that's probably close to what, if you're following along, this is probably what you're seeing. I can increase the isocurves by going over to the properties of that object and go over to my densities and put say 5, and that just gives me more isocurves. Again, it's just a display thing. You don't have to do this, which is why I tend to keep that one off. It's just better to see the clean geometry. Speaking of clean geometry, now what we did, we offset this surface, and if you notice, it created this extra surface, but we don't actually need that. If you think about it, this face is all flat, so there's no reason why the face of that roof should be one uniform surface. If I hold down Control Shift, I can actually select that as a separate surface. I could do the same with this and that, but we don't. Let me just notice. Let's keep this one. Yeah, it doesn't actually matter, so it's just a display thing. You can get rid of all these extra lines by selecting the object and type merge. Was it faces? Yeah, merge face. And it's going to ask you to select the faces. I'll just select that. Ah, I thought that would work. It didn't. Merge face. Ah, merge all faces. Oh, maybe it's that one. Sorry, that's it. So merge all faces, not merge face. Something to write here. Merge. Oh, there we go. Merge all faces. You can see that's now a clean surface, which means we have to leave the room. So, what is it? Is it a drill? Oh, is it? Okay. All right. No need to panic then, I guess. All right. So real quick, to explain why this is important is just decided to come back. Um, if you have all these separate surfaces and say you decide to move this front face further away, again, this is the SketchUp technique. You just press down Control Shift, and you have to select three different surfaces, then move it. If you merge all the faces, that cleans that up, which means all you have to do now is press Control Shift and select one surface and move it. And there are additional benefits when it comes down to creating drawings. The less seams you have in your surfaces, the less cleanup you'll have to do when you make 2D and you decide to clean up the drawing for presentation. Now, right now we have this roof which is separate from the object, and that we have that the actual body, and then we have the base. How do you actually merge all these? So if I select all of them and type join, it's not going to work because you're trying to join two solid objects. This is a solid polysurface, which means it doesn't have any holes. If I drag this away, currently this container is empty. There's a hole. So if the same thing was true for this roof, if all those edges were empty, it would let me join them using the join command. But if they're not, you can use something called a boolean. So that's just the two spheres here. So Boolean union. So if you select all these objects, click on that, that's going to unify all of them into one single surface. Notice how, if you look through the object, you can see that that inner surface of that roof comes and joins onto that, which means it's a watertight object. Now, if I select the roof, it's going to select everything else along with it. If I move into inside, you can see that there is that separation line at the top. And if I switch over to ghost view, this is where you get to see best. So you can now see before it was all merged. We had the roof. You can see that line running. But what we did, we selected that object type and merged all faces. So that cleaned up all the extra bits, and then selected all of them and type Boolean union. Alternatively, you can just click on those two spheres. Let's just put Boolean. Where's caps? Boolean. Right. So we have now created this. So how do you actually go about pushing the faces in and out? Now, that's the tricky bit, because if you hold down Control Shift, select that, sure, you can do this, and maybe that's fine. And you also have to be careful, because I'm not going to try this because I haven't saved the file and it might crash. But what I wanted to show you is if I press down Control Shift, select that surface, and what would happen if I actually move it in this direction? It will deform the surface and it will likely crash the file. So you have to be very careful in the directions you move using the command of Control Shift. So now going back to where it was, Control Z to undo. Now let's say we want to stretch this. And now I don't want to stretch it using this, because you can see that it's also stretching all the elements. The overhang is going to get longer, and I don't want that. All I want is the actual building to stretch. keeping the same proportions on all sides. I can do that by clicking on this. And now, again, this is extra bits that I'm showing you. You don't have to actually do this now. If I go over to my solid tools and click on this one, which is called solid points on, turns on all the points of my object. So now I can just make a selection, and now I can just drag that across and press escape to deactivate this. So now I have that object stretched without deforming it. There's the alternative way, slower way, is if you just go ahead and press down Shift, Control Shift, press that surface, and that surface. There, you could just move that forward. Well, I guess in this instance it was quick, but imagine you have all the windows, all the doors, and everything in there, and then you had to do this. It's much easier to select all the objects, turn on the point, and select all the points on that end. Right. Any questions so far? Anything you want me to repeat? Is it clear? Everything good? Okay, excellent. Right. So, got 15 minutes left, so let's just go through this quickly. How do you punch windows, doors, and all these additional stuff? Guys, there's multiple ways. And again, in Rhino, when you want to model something, you could do it 10 different ways. If I want to draw a surface, I can just draw a line. So hold down Shift, draw a line. And then I can copy that line across. So I can create a surface using two lines. How do I do that? By selecting both and typing in loft, press enter, and that will give me a surface. I can also create a surface using the surface tool, 2 points. I could just create that surface. Another method is if I say have that one line, now I'm going to quickly copy this over, and the shortcut for that is Alt and drag. So if you have an object, if you want to copy it, if you hold down Alt and drag it away, it's going to make a copy, just like pulls a replica to the side. Now, again, one version was to loft the two curves. Second version is, or method rather, is to use extrude curve. When you're extruding a curve, by default, it's going to want to go up. So it's going to go up on Z direction. You can change that direction. Again, pay attention to all the options that are available to you. There's that one. So direction. Now also notice all these options have a little underline underneath a letter. So in this case, direction has D. This is another way of skipping the process of moving your mouse over to the word and then clicking on it by just pressing down D, enter, and now you've technically pressed on the direction. And all you have to do is to set the direction, which is that direction. So that's all I did. Should repeat this again. Select, extrude CRV, D, enter, set the direction, and then extrude that. So that's a different way of producing that surface. It's just so we covered loft to join two surfaces is also extrude CRV. Also, you can extrude surfaces. So if I go select it as a surface and type in extrude S or F, I can extrude that. So remember, creating a box isn't necessarily by dragging 2 points and then setting the height. You can actually have a footprint of the, say, a house in this case, and then you can just extrude using that surface. So now that I have this, the other thing I also have to enable is where it says solid, it's currently set to no, so I can have to click on that. Otherwise, it's going to give me an empty box. Now, let's say it was an empty box. We'll just drag this across. Quick way to make this into a solid, you can just select and type cap, and I will just cap the two ends. You have to be careful if the object is not planar, so the open boundaries of that object is not planar. And for instance, in this case, solid PT on. Let's say if I drag 1 point up, right now the top bit is not planar, it's not flat. So if I type cap, it's only going to cap the bottom end, not the top end. But that's not a problem. If say this is the object that you're looking for, and you really want to cap the top, a quick way is remember the loft command. You have two curves you could loft. You can do the same with this. All you have to do is press down Control Shift, click on this, and then click on that. So you've technically selected two edges. These two edges are not lines, but loft command doesn't actually care about that. As long as you've selected two edges, just type loft, and that will loft loft the ends. And now remember, it's a separate surface, so you have to select all, type join, and you have that. If you don't want to have it joined, all you have to do is type explode, and now this will explode it into separate individual surfaces. So you've got the bottom, right, all the sides. So that's just to give you an idea. Again, modeling the same thing 10 different ways, or even more. It's just up to you how you want to do it. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because I want to get into the windows and how do you actually do the windows. One way is to say if you drawn the window on the side, so you go onto your top view and you just draw the line. So that's my line, and now I can just offset that line by that much. And if that's too thick, I can just scale it up. Let's say that's the opening, and all we want to do is punch that opening through. Now, a slow way would be, okay, I've drawn this. Now I have to line it up against the face. And you guys remember the trim command that we used to trim the roof away? You can use curves to trim surfaces. So in this case, I'm just going to start rotating and hold down Shift to actually rotate it 90 degrees. Move. If I can manage to spell it right. Move. And then snap it onto the edge. And then maybe move it up. Now I know for a fact that this face is lining up exactly on that wall. So all I have to do is select this and type trim. And as soon as I press the inside, it's going to just trim away that wall. So let's just go over to shaded view. So you can see that now I have trimmed away that wall. So that was rotate using gimbal, and it was just trim, right? Yeah, I think it was just trim. People are anxious to start the next lecture, so let's try to wrap this up. How do you create the frame? So if I select both rectangles, and if I type in planar SRF, again, these are just commands that I'm showing you that you can do the same thing, but there's so many ways you could do it. If you have two curves within each other, you can select the two and then type in planar SRF, and that will give you a that surface. So let's just put that one down, planar SRF. Oops, 1R. Okay, now the other thing is, do you remember you can move in and out and do all of these things, scale and all that using gumball? The nice thing in Rhino 6, you also have this little circle here, which you can actually use that to drag out, and that will extrude. So any object you have, whatever reason you decide to make this thicker, you can just do that, and that will create an odd-looking roof. So now we have all these. We just want to join them. We just do that. Right. So what happened was sometimes, unless the two objects are intersecting with each other, it's not going to turn it into a Boolean. So if I just increase that, I just increase that so it has a slight overlap with this, and that should hopefully work. Let's see if that. Yeah. So that now worked, and now you have the two objects joined together. So let's just, I think this is enough for this. Just quickly, for next week, all you have to do with Rhino, go over to this plus sign, click on this, and do new layout. Make sure this is set to Rhino PDF, and make sure the sheet size is set to A4, and we'll keep it portrait. Click OK. This is, for AutoCAD users, it's the paper space. This is where you're in paper space and nothing can be three-dimensional. This is your detail view. So if I double click here, I have access to my model. I can zoom in and then double click outside to disable it. I can select the window, choose the point to actually frame what I want to show. Or in this case, we're not going to want any of that. We're going to just delete that. So all you need to do is type text. And that's another way of typing a text box. So you just put the height of, say, 5 millimeters, your name over to the corner. That's going to go there. Make sure you don't misspell your name. Go. And maybe put the assignment number. That will be helpful. Assignment 1. There will be 8 assignments technically. Midterm is assignment number 5. And then when you have this set, all you have to do is to go back to your images. So what I'm aiming for is this document, if it opens. There. So you name assignment number, object 1, all the photographs, object 2, 1 photograph, and the dimensioned page. You don't have to scan it. You can just take a photo, but it's best to scan it. Otherwise, it will look like in a poor quality like this one. Right. So real quick, bringing in all those images, all you have to do is to drag them one by one. Picture, image 1, same thing again, picture image 2. And it's the same thing. And if you want to add extra bits, feel free to explore your creative input on this page. It's really up to you how you want to present this. So basically just put in these extra bits. Oops. Alt, there you go. Object 1, object 2. Well, you only have 2, promise. Now when it's done, all you have to do is to type print, press enter. Again, destination, just have a look. It's really straightforward. All you have to do is to press print, and that will save the file as a PDF somewhere else. You don't have to take any of the snapshots or screenshots to Word document, InDesign, or any of that. Everything is from Rhino. All right, I think that's it. Thank you very much for coming in. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, good. Thank you.